Welcome to the Forge, my wanton wildlings. I'm your creepsmith, and I hope you like my work.
Welcome back, wildlings. Your home, that is your house, the building that gives you your primary shelter, can be the most comforting thing in the world after a bad day. On the other hand, if you experience its old secrets or perhaps new behaviors, it can be horrific and threatening in a place that you normally go to feel safe. There are even those unique houses that are, well, predatory, waiting to feed off you or consume you and your loved ones entirely. What then? Such is the distress faced by tonight's paternal protagonist in The House with Painted Doors, written by Straydog 1980. The doctor told me it was a figment of my imagination, a hallucination, a phantom limb, cut off, but the ghost of a feeling remains. The doctor then tutted and prescribed me a different pill. I have lost count of how many pills I've tried. There was the yellow one, and the red and white capsule, and the green one. They've succeeded in giving me incontinence, nausea, and hair loss, but they haven't taken my girl away. My doctor told me to talk about it, tell people. Who the hell am I supposed to tell something like this? My last friends abandoned me when Sylvia left. It's late here. Where to start when there's so much to tell? At the beginning, I suppose. That's always a good place. We thought that we'd made it when we moved to the suburbs. We had well-paying jobs. Fluke or competence had saved us when the waves of cuts hit around 2010. For once in our lives, money wasn't a problem. 8 years earlier, we had Annabelle, Belle for short. She was our little angel. Parents out there will know. A child shifts the center of gravity in your life. The move was good for her, good for us. Away from the hustle and the danger of the city. Busy streets, missing children, sticky hands and staring eyes of sexual predators. It wasn't the house of our dreams, but it was close enough. A lawn for the balmy summer months, fireplace for the chill of winter, space for us to grow into, especially for a young girl. It came fully furnished, and it was a steal. A distressed sale, our agent called it. At least a tenth off of what a similar property would have set us back. The euphoria and the novelty, well, they lasted me till the first night. Sylvia was asleep next to me. The moonlight sparkled off the fine hairs on her bare shoulder. We had shared a celebratory drink for dinner, and then, after that, another. I was lying in bed, basking in the warm glow of alcohol, when I first heard it. My first thought was that it was rats. That's exactly what it sounded like, the little tap dance of tiny claws on hardwood coming from the walls. The delicate snoring from next to me told me that Sylvia was completely undisturbed by the scratching noises coming from the walls. I flinched as my bare feet touched the floor. The floorboards groaned in protest as I padded across them like an overweight ninja. The tapping paused at the first creak of the floorboards and then resumed. The rough weave of the wallpaper under my palm as I leaned in to track the pitter-patter behind the walls. The scampering sounds eluded me. Every time I tried to track the rats, the sounds seemed to come from another part of the room. My knees grew sore from the pressure. I wasn't some young child at a playground. I was a grown man, and my weight pressed down on the bony points of my kneecaps. Out of desperation, I put my ear to the wall, hoping that the source of the little noises would reveal itself to me. But I was only met with a stubborn silence. Or almost a stubborn silence. On the edge of my hearing, so quiet that I had to strain my ears to pick it up, a child's laughter from inside the walls. I didn't speak of the incident. I spent more time trying to convince myself that there hadn't been that childish giggle. Wind, perhaps, the rattle of a toy. Not a rattle, maybe. One of those newfangled dolls with the soulless eyes and the microchip voices. There was a change in her, like the heavy air you can smell before a thunderstorm. She was a little quieter than usual. A strange environment will do that to a kid, make them a little withdrawn. Sylvia apparently didn't really notice. I suppose I'd always been more observant than her. Belle started looking tired, dark crescents appearing under her light hazel eyes. She wasn't getting much sleep. My first instinct was to blame the rats in the walls. Who wouldn't? They got louder and louder as the days went by. Damn things were keeping me up at night. It seemed like the sounds progressed from simple scratchings to thumps, almost as though those cursed rodents were hurling themselves bodily against the walls. The thumping started sounding eerily like footsteps. I wasn't about to be defeated by a group of jumped-up rats in my own house. Fueled by rage, I waged war. I tried glue traps, I tried poison, tried cages. Nothing worked. I asked Sylvia about it, but she seemed oblivious to the late-night disturbances. I swear, that woman could sleep through a hurricane. I asked Belle if the noise was keeping her up at night. Sylvia was over in the living room watching TV while Belle and I did the dishes. She just looked up with those big eyes of hers. The other children want to come in and play, but they can't open the door. Girl always had an overactive imagination, but this one hit a little too close to home for me. I felt the unfamiliar prickle of goose flesh on my arm. You mean the door to the house? I asked, keeping my tone deliberately playful. It was a game, just another of her little games. I had imaginary friends at that age. Why should my own child be any different? No, Daddy. The door behind the cupboard. We were up in her room. The opening theme from Desperate Housewives floated up through the floorboards, a world away. I thought that I'd humor my little girl, but there was something deathly serious in her tone that I couldn't shake. I reached back around the standalone wardrobe and felt nothing more than the smooth paint on the wall. Well, there's no door here, honey. Look closer, she insisted. I held up my cell phone for light, still playing along. There was something strange in that palm width of space between the cupboard and the wall. A discoloration of the wall, maybe. Something darker in the shade of the wardrobe. The hard edges of that wardrobe bit into the soft flesh of my fingers. I put my back into it, and the piece of furniture gave ground, albeit grudgingly. And there it was. A door behind the wardrobe, just as Belle had said. Not any door, though. I ran my fingers over the smooth surface of the wall. Not a physical door at all, just a painted one. So convincing were the brush strokes on the door that I had to touch the wall again to tell myself that it wasn't real. How did you know this was here, Baby Bear? I asked. The other children told me. From school? As far as I knew, she hadn't brought friends home before. No, Daddy. The children from behind the door, she said. I looked into her tawny eyes, hoping to catch some twinkle of mischief there. There was nothing there but an innocent earnestness. I lay in bed that night, just studying the cracks on the ceiling. My heart pounded hard in my chest, a heavy bass line above the distant rumble of the heating. My daughter's words had unsettled me in a strange way. I just couldn't pinpoint it. It felt off somehow, like a surrealist painting, one tiny detail throwing my carefully ordered world into disarray. I took deep breaths, trying to drive away that strange, tight fear in my chest. That odd painted door, was it a mural of some sort? Why was it still there when the room had been so clearly repainted? The thumping of the rats in the walls sounding so much like little footsteps. The children from behind the door, she had said. I rubbed at my forearms vigorously, trying to press the goosebumps back down into my skin. And that's when the thumping started again. Not rats, I realized. Not rats at all. Footsteps. The light bounce of a child's foot. I crept up to my wall again, pressing my ear against the wallpaper. There was laughter there, soft and faint. Not the laughter of a single child. Children. Their happy footfalls beating a rough drumbeat on the wooden floor. There was someone else in there with my daughter. My heart jumped. I felt the chill in my veins as I rushed out of my room and tore down the corridor. The silvery light of the moon shone through the window. It gave everything an odd, flat look without contrast. Belle's room was only a few feet from the door to our bedroom, but my chest heaved with deep, body-shaking breaths. I could still hear them faintly through the door, the thud of feet on the floor. I steeled myself. It was nothing. Sound traveled strangely through these old houses. Echoes, maybe. She was just talking to herself in her sleep. The stress of moving, perhaps. Suitably calmed, I turned the doorknob slowly. There was a conspiratorial shush from the other side of the door, and silence descended like a shroud. Then I gave the door a gentle push. The room was dark and quiet. The moonlight crept into the room. My daughter was standing there, just behind the door, a still figure, dark against the background. The shock took the strength from my legs. I backed away a little quicker than I had meant to. She still just stood there, swaying slightly. Thin white crescents showed from under her hooded eyes. Her lips were moving almost soundlessly. I leaned forward, straining to make out what she was saying, and it slowly became clear. One sentence, over and over. All the doors are open now. All the doors are open. And from behind her, in the shadowed room, the quiet click of a door shutting. Belle didn't recall a thing the next morning. She could sense my frustration and fear as I quizzed her about the night before. Dark circles framed puzzled eyes in her pale little face. She hadn't slept well last night either. Sylvia took her to school. I hadn't broached the topic with Syl yet. There was still some time before I had to leave for the office. So I crept back into my daughter's room, feeling like a thief in my own empty house. I stood in front of that strange painted door for the second time in as many days. I ran my fingers around its edges, remembering the strange sound of the door shutting from the night before. Its edges were wholly contiguous with the rest of the wall. I pulled the wardrobe out further, putting my entire frame between the wardrobe and the door and leaning into it. There was no give, no yielding of the door. It was just painted over a wall as solid as any other. I was about to go when I heard an unfamiliar rasp under my foot. The floor was gritty with some kind of dust, so I knelt down and pinched some of it up between two fingers. All the doors are open now. My daughter's dreamy voice in my ear, my memory of it so sharp that it seemed she was right there whispering it. How odd that was, for the dust to be pink. Of course it would be. It wasn't dust at all. It was paint. Paint from the wall. Things didn't get better. The gambling footsteps continued at night, unabated. That and the whispers and the giggles every night. Whatever was in my daughter's room was toying with me. It never let Sylvia hear. I would stay up waiting to wake my wife up just in time to hear it, only to be met with a stubborn silence. Trickery wouldn't work either. We stayed up late to catch a DVD long into the small hours of the night, but the house remained quiet. The laughter from the next room was always tantalizingly distant. The happy sounds of children at play as though from a great distance. Too great a distance to be in the room next to mine. Belle was in high spirits, but she was wasting away. Sylvia hadn't noticed it yet, but I felt it in the sharp bones of her shoulders pressing into my arms when I hugged her, or the skinny arms I could almost encircle with my thumb and forefinger. I received an email from her form teacher mentioning that Belle still wasn't integrating well at school. He said that she was perpetually tired in class and that she had blamed late-night games of tag and hide-and-seek with her friends for her tiredness. You need to exercise more control over your girl, he had said. I had to know what was going on. Sylvia was already asleep. The nightly visits hadn't started yet. So I slid into Belle's room silently, an open packet of flour in my hand. I scattered it all around the floor, taking care not to step onto the flour myself. I lay back in my bed with a sigh, waiting for the sound to start. Sleep took me unexpectedly, but what little I had was fitful and restless. I woke with a snort at first light. It was a Saturday, and it would be some time yet before the rest of the world woke. I stretched under the covers, my back popping satisfyingly. I blinked the sleep from my eyes. Oh, the flour. I had to check the flour. I swung my feet off the bed and planted them on the flour, right next to a pair of white, speckled footprints, just where they would be if someone was standing over my bed, staring at me. The damnable chill up my back stole the warmth of the morning sun from my skin. My hands clenched and unclenched spastically like dying spiders. I stared at the trail of flour-marked footprints from my open door. How long had she stood there in the dark watching me sleep, I wondered. I stood up on shaky legs, my hand on the wall, to support myself down the corridor. Belle's door was ajar, so it swung open silently. The sound of deep breathing told me that Belle was still asleep, but there was a single set of footprints, just starting from her bed where her feet would have landed if she got off. No multiple footprints, just a single set from my daughter. Typical somnambulism, perhaps. The stress of the move or the new school could have brought it on. She'd never sleepwalked before, but who knew what dark things lurked in the psyche of a child? I heaved a sigh of relief, chastising myself for a week's worth of irrationality. How reassuring, the illusion of normalcy in our lives, and how quickly it shatters. Not with a roar or a flash, but with something simple. Something simple like my daughter's shoe bouncing off my toe as I tried to leave the room, flipping once, twice, and coming to rest next to a hollow in the flour on the floor. The size, the shoe, the prints. It didn't fit. It didn't match. Whatever had gotten off the bed had stood next to me the night before. It wasn't Belle. After my mistake and the cruel prank that resulted from it, the noises at night returned unabated. The strangeness started to leak. The night was no longer its sole province. I was waiting for Belle outside the upstairs toilet another Saturday morning when I heard the familiar taunting voices start up over the sound of the shower. A chorus of children's voices saying something with a strange cadence, a chant almost. Stay, they seemed to say. Stay, stay, stay. They were in there. There was no way for them to escape. I found the door unlocked, so I turned the knob, braced my legs, and threw the door open, and found nothing. Hot water still gushed from the shower head. Steam billowed out into the cooler air of the corridor. No one was there. I'd seen her go in. I would have wagered my life on it, and yet she was gone. The giggling started again, coming down the corridor, mocking. Her room this time. I bolted down the corridor, found her there, a towel wrapped around her bare body, staring at me with cold mirth from her bed. Her dripping hair had left a trail of water on the wooden floor, a trail which led to the wall with the painted door. I felt her eyes trailing me as I left the room. Then I shut the shower off, looking for how my daughter and the voices had escaped that tiny toilet. It took a minute, like a picture with the young lady that turned into an old crone. The answer was right there in front of me, sketched out between the tiles in front of me in bold strokes of dark mildew was the vague outline of a door. Then it was another sleepless night. I thought long and hard about trying to explain everything to Sylvia. It sounded crazy even to myself. There were doors in the walls, doors that our daughter had walked through, doors that let in something strange into our house, something that wanted her to stay. The thought lingered in the back of my head like a suppurative scab, itchy and red and raw. Sleep wouldn't come easy. I was contemplating a little chemical assistance to aid me along when I grew aware of a soft sliding sound. Movement caught my eye, and I saw a slim figure slowly shuffle by the door to our bedroom. "Belle?" I called out to her softly. She didn't break step. And what a step it was, stiff-armed and stiff-legged, marching down the corridor, her feet scraping over the wooden floor. "Belle!" I called out a little louder. There was no response. I got out of bed and tiptoed to the door. The door to the toilet clicked shut softly, so I followed. The lights revealed an empty corridor. The toilet door yielded with a squeak of complaint. The silence was thick and cloying. It seemed that no sound would carry through the air. The light clicked to life in the toilet, and shadows leaped and danced with its first few flickers. The shower curtain swayed. That must have been the draft that I had let in when I opened the door, I told myself. It didn't help. I chided myself for my childish fears, but the flutter in my gut remained. I yanked the curtain aside roughly, my other hand balled into a fist to protect myself. From what? My daughter? Nothing awaited me on the other side of the curtain, nothing but that strange outline of a door etched out in the lines between the tiles. I heaved a sigh of relief. Perhaps the lack of sleep was getting to me, my fears spilling over into waking dreams. The calm that I had was short-lived, though. I heard another door slam shut downstairs. A series of childish titters carried up through the floorboards, so I bolted downstairs. Again, the lights revealed nothing. Almost nothing. The huge throw rugs that had come with the furnished house had been tossed aside, and there, hidden under them, was another door, scratched in the parquet flooring. I felt sick to my stomach thinking of the days that we'd spent on the couch with our feet on that hideous thing. I ran my fingers around the thin grooves of scratch marks. The door felt cool to the touch, cooler than the surrounding wood anyway. The same feel of a front door guarding against a winter chill. Whatever it was that the door guarded against, it was cold, very cold. And the laughter started again. Taunting, mocking. I heard the creak of my daughter's footsteps on the stairs to the basement. The light of the living room seemed to shy away from the depths of that basement. I could make out Belle's outline just where the light of the living room met the darkness, and the light switch was at the foot of the stairs. The steps sang under my weight. Belle didn't turn around. I reached out to grab her shoulder. Her bony shoulder was ice cold. I pulled her towards me. I could just nearly see her face. Something blotted out the light, and I blinked at the silhouette at the top of the staircase. "Daddy, why are all the lights on?" Belle's voice. Oh God. Belle was at the top of the stairs. I felt the light caress of fingers on my hand. The girl in front of me, her fingers on mine. Her voice was a hoarse whisper, as though forced from a throat long turned to dust. "She's ours now." She giggled and twisted away from my grasp, vanishing into the dark. The dark space under the house suddenly filled with the patter of feet on the dusty floor. 2 pairs, 3, until it seemed that an entire legion of feet were dancing across the floor. The sound was deafening in that confined space. I reached forward and thumbed the light switch, only to be greeted by silence and slowly settling dust. Something was wrong with the wall again. I already knew what to expect. With a sweep of my hand, I cleared dust from the wall, and, just as I expected, another door. This one, a huge set of double doors painted on the wall with garish colors. Just before I left the basement, I saw the clean circles on the floor where the opening door had swept the dust away. We had to go. There was something dark in that house, something wholly unnatural about those strange painted doors. I sprinted up the stairs. "Grab some clothes," I told Belle as I passed her. I didn't stop to see if there was a shred of understanding in her blank eyes. She turned and followed me silently upstairs. I shook Sylvia awake, roughly. 4 weeks to the day we moved in, and we were fleeing our own home. She blinked the sleep from her eyes. In hushed tones, I tried to explain the situation to her. The painted doors, the sounds of the children, the danger we were all in. Her expression slowly changed from sleepy bewilderment to one of disbelief and annoyance. She told me that I was overreacting, that the stress of the move and our job was taking its toll on me. We would talk about it in the morning, she said, get help from a doctor if we needed to. I grew increasingly agitated at her apathy. I begged her to humor me for just one night, for our family to shift to a motel for a single evening. Our conversation grew heated, and all of this was cut short when Belle reappeared at our doorway. Her hair was wild, her eyes burning with some inner fire. "You should go now. All the doors are closing soon. I have to stay with them." Her voice was toneless, the flat delivery of an atheist reciting a litany. Sylvia gaped. Having her daughter acting as strangely as her husband tipped her over the edge. Weeping, she rushed forward and held Belle close to her. "You're not going anywhere, baby. This isn't real. Daddy's sick. He's made you sick, too. You and I'll get away from here. Get away from Daddy." Those words felt like physical blows. I felt sick. My wife started pulling at Belle's hand, trying to move her, but the child stood fast, and there was nothing my wife, with her advantages in strength and weight, could do to shift her an inch. Sensing their prey about to evade them, the things in the house grew restless. Our room filled with the sound of feet on the floor, the sound of little feet running up and down the corridors. With a squeak, Sylvia pulled the door shut and leaned against it. The door shuddered on its hinges as unseen things flung themselves against it. When they were unsuccessful, the house grew silent. Syl just stared at the doorknob. I shook my head, stepping off the bed. I had just gotten to my feet when a new horror showed itself. Our wall was stretching, distending like a boil, bulging obscenely toward us. There was a door in our room, under the wallpaper. It had been there all along. Sylvia began to sob, a big, hiccuping sound of fear. We heard the tearing sound of the glue ripping off the walls. The blister on the wall took shape. I saw the hard edge of the door straining against the wallpaper, and behind that, the sharp points of fingers pressing against the paper, pushing it outward. Many, many pairs of hands, and then a rip. A pale finger burst through the thick wallpaper, hooked downwards, and began to tear at the fabric. Syl and I were transfixed by the sight, paralyzed by fear. Sylvia screamed as Belle tore herself free from her mother's grasp. The child took a single step forward and placed her hand on the light switch. In that moment, I saw my daughter again, for the last time. Her eyes sparkled with tears. "Don't look. You don't want to see them. I love you." With a flick of her wrist, she plunged the room into total darkness. The sound of wallpaper ripping was extremely loud. The temperature in the room fell. It felt larger somehow, like we weren't in the bedroom of our home anymore, but in some vast, empty space. A chill wind blew through, and it smelt of dry dust. When the wind died down, we were alone in our room. Our girl was gone. What is there to say after that? We did what we could. We moved into a motel. The police came. They looked for prints. They asked questions. They took pictures. They broke down the walls behind the doors with their hammers. Nothing. The detectives came. They asked more questions. Hard questions sometimes. They took me away for a while. And the doctors came. They cajoled and they counseled. They asked me about my parents, about our family, if I had ever hurt my daughter. The doctors found nothing wrong with me. The cops found nothing in my house. The detectives found nothing false in our story. They let me go. Sylvia and I stayed with her parents for a month. Belle's disappearance had ripped a hole in our lives. We tried. Some things, they just don't heal right. Others don't heal at all. Things weren't the same. The split was amicable. We just drifted. No arguments, no fights. Just a slow death of the love that had once bound us. And what then? I came back here. There was nowhere else I could go. The first night was the hardest. The bedroom was out of the question. I spent the first night on the couch, hugging a bottle of Jack. It was midnight when the laughter woke me. They were still there in the house. Through the tinkling of the laughter, I could pick out just a single voice. A father never forgets the voice of their child. The doors were gone, but they were still there. She was still there. I'll stop here for the night. I can hear her again. She sounds happy. So, next time you're feeling contemptuous of your boring old home, remember, it can always be worse. At least you're not short a loved one because your house got hungry. Count your blessings. And be thankful. Stay scary, my wildlings. Remember, research is your friend, and make the most of your nights.